I fell into a depression for the first time in my life. And I finally understood, wow, this is what it means when people are depressed. Like, I would struggle to do anything, even get out of bed. I would find it difficult to take a shower. I ended up in the psychiatric ward for 9 days, intensive care units. This is where my mom tells me about a big trauma that happened that I had no idea had ever happened. I needed a powerful tool in order to go so far back in time and heal something so deeply rooted. And so that's led me to where I am today. And it's also led me to the biggest psychedelic experience that I did in order to heal that trauma from when I was 5 years old. And I felt in my body that these tears had been locked inside of me for 25 years. They are here to deliver us a message of self-understanding. But I really felt like all my worries are gone. Like, I have glimpsed at the experience of my infinite nature. Everything is in me, and I am everything. I'd been longing for happiness in general. And at first, I was seeking happiness externally. There was the beginning of the year where I started taking psychedelics quite intensely, but that the beginning of that year had a theme where I set myself an intention of doing more of the things that I liked and doing less of the things that I didn't like. And I had found out over the last few years that I liked going clubbing, I liked going to festivals, I liked, having fun with friends, partying, this kind of thing. I liked adventure, and I was doing all those things, and I was also in some ways accumulating some material possessions, and it was all okay, but I did realize that I'm pretty much working during the week and living for the weekend, and things are kind of looking the same. And this is a little bit where psychedelics kind of helped me make something not the same anymore. But yeah, then at the time I was living in the US and I was far from family, which who are based in Europe. And I was struggling with life in the winter over there in Michigan, and I decided I wanted to go explore Europe. And just before I quit my job, or right when I quit my job, that's when I had mental health psychiatric hospitalization. And that really opened up a whole different chapter in my life.
And what did that experience turn into for you?
Had no plan for what was next. I ended up in the psychiatric ward for 9 days, intensive care units. I was really confused and frustrated about why I was in there because I think now that I look back upon it, I reframe it as a spiritual awakening. But for me, whatever my mental health issues were, was just such a clarity about the universe and physics and the quantum nature of reality and God and existence and myself and my place within it. And I was thinking, how can people not have these realizations? And I was just in another world. And that discrepancy of how I was within my head versus how the world perceived me and how I spoke about it by my excitement, that and I spoke a lot in metaphors, and I was really thinking, I was seeing patterns everywhere. Whatever numbers that I would see, whatever pattern of cars were going by, the number of trees on a street, I would interpret this as a sign of something. And so this was a little bit out of the usual, and it was a bit dysfunctional. And so at the end of that hospitalization and during it, I was put on schizophrenia medication, antipsychotics, heavily sedative kind of stuff. And I ended up, when I get back home at my girlfriend's place at the time, I fell into a depression for the first time in my life. And I finally understood, wow, this is what it means when people are depressed. Like, I would struggle to do anything, even get out of bed. I would find it difficult to take a shower. I had to delay my flights because I couldn't take care of my stuff. I had to cancel my road trip that I was going to do to celebrate, being done with my job and then before moving to Europe. Um, yeah, just so many things changed, and I was in a state with zero motivation and zero ability to do anything, to take care of anything. And that lasted a while. It lasted at least until I took the plane and I got back home to my family. And in my family, I wasn't in as much of a depression, but I was low and I was in a way that my family had never seen me before. And I was irritable and I still had a little bit of this um, overly pattern recognizing, overly analyzing kind of brain mode that was not coherent with the everyday reality that everybody else was experiencing. And it took me a while to just get back on my feet from that and land into a new job. And all in all, there were a couple of years where um, I had that first psychiatric ward experience in 2017. I had another one in 2019 for slightly different reasons, but anyway, the reason that I'm sharing a little bit about the timeline is now we're in 2026 and I haven't had any mental health issues since. And I've even come off of my bipolar medication, which I had been on since the second episode in 2019 until end of 2024. Actually, the first day of 2025 was both a New Year ritual and a rebirth for me because of the quitting medication transition, and that was a huge path, huge story that I've been through.
When you look back now, what do you feel was happening to you?
At the time, my words were like, "Can't you see? I'm God, you're God, we're all God, this universe is da 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 da." And I was speaking about it in such a rapid pace way with such high energy. Like, I felt it. I embodied this download, but the way that I delivered my message was not coherent because I was still processing it. I did not have the awareness of this as a possible experience. I did not predict that it would happen. I did not have the right container to hold it. I didn't have the stable nervous system or spiritual understandings to hold it. And so I guess it broke down.
What happened that led to you being taken to the hospital?
Yeah, so it was my girlfriend at the time that took me because she was worried. I had some previous signs before, but not anything that didn't auto correct. And for some reason there was two other factors. There was one on the last day before actually quitting my job. I was at a conference where I met someone that I really had a soul connection or a brain connection and an ambitious connection. And I thought that we would maybe be working together to save the world in some ways. And so I was really excited about that and the potential for that as my next chapter. That ignited a lot within me. And another thing that happened overnight, and it was actually that very morning post that night, which I was taken to the hospital, I had some altered state, dream, or conscious sleepwalking, some experience that I can hardly put words to, that I thought I saw a black hole outside the window. But I know that I took my body to the window and I pressed my eyes against the window to make sure that if I'm seeing through the anti mosquito grill, I'm not looking at something that I think is an illusion. And I did confirm that it was not a black hole, whatever I saw. But the impression that it made on me just made my heart rate go fast. And I knew that I couldn't sleep. It was like 3 or 4 in the morning. And I was in a state where even if the threat, quote unquote, had passed, I knew that I would no way be able to sleep again at that point. And I have no idea why the message came that way, or what that message was for, or what form it was. I don't know if I was asleep and lucid dreaming that I actually went up to the window. I don't know if I was sleepwalking and actually did go to the window. I don't know if it was a download. I don't know if it was entities communicating with me. I don't know what it was, but it put me in a state that agitated my girlfriend. And that's when I was taken to the hospital for basic evaluations. And from there, I was completely lost. Like, why am I being taken this way, that way? Now I'm in a room. Wait, where's my girlfriend? And wait, why are you keeping me here for more than one day? And I'm having all of these thoughts related to the nature of the universe, physics, God, etc.
Up to that point, what psychedelic were you using?
I had mainly experienced LSD in that year prior, and it wasn't just a one off or two, it was more than 20 to 30 times. I mean, I was taking it on average every other weekend. Now, not big doses every time, sometimes one big dose, then a break, then a small dose, then a break, then a medium, this kind of pattern. Um, and the funny thing is, I would be taking LSD instead of drinking alcohol because I had done some research and I thought, this is a better experience. It feels good. It seems less toxic for the body. Nothing wrong with that from my perspective. Prior to that, there was also MDMA as a kind of gateway towards psychedelics. Now, I mean, it's not necessarily um, that I wouldn't have taken psychedelics if I hadn't taken MDMA, but I think it's just what came across my path first through the dance music rave kind of scene. And prior to that, there was a lot of marijuana use. And I had observed my marijuana use. And I thought, marijuana is good in some times, but also bad in some other times. It really makes me lazy. It really makes me overeat. Yeah, there's a boost in creativity, and it's given me a lot of insights about myself and about life. But there were some downsides that I wish I didn't have. And that's why I kind of gradually pivoted more towards that dance music scene and the LSD as my recreational kind of yeah experience.
After the second episode, what did that period of your life look like?
After the second episode, I again had to go back to family. So I was working in the UK at the time, and my family was living in France. And I, although I got to France before COVID happened, I hadn't yet recovered by the time COVID started spreading. And so the restrictions came in place, and that delayed my ability to go back into the stable, steady job life. So I was a little bit forced to take a pause and slow down as I was getting better. And in this season of my life, I started digging into spirituality because I was like, now that I've had two episodes, I can no longer dismiss the first episode as an off chance. Now there's a pattern, and I need to look into that pattern. And since a lot of my thoughts had to do with quantum physics, God, and the nature of the universe, and so spirituality, I started having some conversations and I was recommended to look into Eastern philosophies. And I had already started experimenting with meditation, but this season really made me dive deeper into meditation and explore some of the Eastern texts. One of the most significant ones for me was a book called I Am That by Nisargadatta Maharaj. And that book really put a little bit, it started to put that framework of my understanding of spirituality that I had experienced, but I didn't have the words for. And as I kept going in my spiritual journey, I realized that it's the spiritual journey, learning about spirituality through reading the texts, has given me not only the frameworks, but the compassion and the validation that I was seeking for my spiritual awakening kind of states and making sense of them and finally feeling understood. Yeah. So then that was the COVID season. And at some point, when the restrictions relaxed, I was able to get a job again. And when I got a job again, I went back into the system. I was on medication. Even during the COVID, I was on medication as well. Um, but I was being followed up by the system in the UK again. And I was starting to learn about tools to become more aware of my trigger factors and risk factors so as to be able to minimize the chances of further episodes happening again. There's another um, phase after, I guess there's another two phases after that. One phase where I had already decided that I was pursuing the entrepreneurship path with coaching as a side gig to my day job. And in that path, I was seeking a specialization, something to distinguish me, something to further my skills in the coaching world. And that's when I landed into the neuroscience of flow states. And that was a fascinating topic for me. So it became my specialty right away. I The intersection of flow states with psychedelics and music and festivals and the rave scene, it all just made me want to study the neuroscience, especially when combined with my ambition and my desire for health. Because flow state neuroscience was framed as a peak performance modality. So I was like, I want to learn about that. I want to learn how to get into a flow state naturally. And so I did, and it improved my life dramatically. It made my sleep better, my motivation better, my productivity better, my mental health better, my relationships better, my boundaries better, my use of technology better. I got a sleep tracker, which I still use to this day, Oura Ring, and um, and I've just been a little. I wouldn't consider myself a biohacker, but I've been interested in really getting to a deeper knowledge about my mind, my body, and how to optimize my performance. And flow states were a big part of that. Then fast forward a little more personal development. I had goals. Still, I always have goals, and this time my goals were about getting in a better shape, better physique, and building a business. And at the time, I was struggling because I didn't have much stability. I didn't have much money. I had quit my job, uh, and I moved to a different city that was cheaper than London so that I could survive for a lot longer. But I didn't realize the toll that this would take on my nervous system. And so I found myself dealing with a binge eating disorder pattern. And it's something that had never shown up, or if it had shown up, it showed up as a very small hint before. But now it showed up as a big thing because I had quit drinking alcohol. I had quit psychedelics after the second episode. I had quit marijuana. I basically had quit all of these pleasure seeking habits. And what was left? Food. So I would find myself eating a full Indian meal with a friend, and then I'd be home and I'd be bored and I'd be lonely. So I'd eat a full other pizza and I'd eat two tubs of ice cream. And I was like, well, everything I did in the gym that morning has gone to waste. And this is a pattern. It's not just happening one time, it can happen back to back days. And so I was like, I need to get help for this. That's when I told my parents, look, parents, I've got this eating pattern that is out of control right now. It's a big problem, and it is my highest priority, even though I'm not making any money in my business. Uh, what what's going on, I don't know, but I'm gonna ask the medical system. So I did that in parallel. And in another parallel, because it took a few times of me reporting it to my parents, the first reaction was, oh, it's okay, compassion, it happens, don't worry about it too much. And I had shame as well. I wasn't going to say, it's happened 10 times already. I said it's happened, end of. But after I had said it a few times, then for my 30th birthday, I had a conversation with my mom who actually told me that she had a big secret that she thinks would be key in learning and learning about my situation and making myself better. Like one of the keys that I needed to know about, and that she would tell me a little bit later in person. My birthday's in November, and we were going to meet for Christmas anyway. So at that Christmas, this is where my mom tells me about a big trauma that happened that I had no idea had ever happened. When I was 5 years old, my mom was sexually assaulted, and I was in the room nearby, and I had a perception of it. And although I wasn't the one assaulted, what I do know from my mom's reporting is that she crossed into another dimension. She was on quote unquote the other side. And I, although I didn't tell my mom directly that I knew something had happened, I told my teacher. And my teacher is the one who told my mom. And that's how my mom knew that I knew that something happened. And I had no recollection of it. It was totally suppressed, totally out of my psyche, out of my conscious mind. And it was just unknown, like really unknown to me. So yeah, then that pretty much for me explained a big part of where did my bipolar vulnerability come from. And it helped me reframe that maybe I'm actually not bipolar. Maybe it was the trauma plus ADHD that was the issue that led to bipolar symptoms in the situation where I was quitting a job and didn't have a plan for what's next and moving across an ocean. As a 24-year-old, uh, yeah, it could be a lot to handle, I think. And that's where I get my new understanding of my mental health journey. Immediately after my mom told me about the incidents, I released some tears, and I felt in my body that these tears had been locked inside of me for 25 years. So that was already a part of the healing journey. No therapy session needed, just knowing what happened from the perspective that there's something else that is a factor, which isn't me. And that reduces a lot of my self blame. I remember that in the following week, I actually looked at the mirror for the first time and I had compassion, even admiration for the body that I had built. Whereas 2 weeks before, I was still criticizing it because it's not good enough. And that transition having been done, and this new state of self love having been received, I also continued the work with therapy because I had been learning about theoretical stuff around therapy, learning about trauma, learning about the body, learning about emotions. And I was starting to work with a somatic therapist on the eating disorder issues. And the more we worked together, the more my symptoms reduced. Now, it's not been a linear journey because we worked together for 6 months. And after that 6 months, there were still situations where if I was lonely and I didn't have a social circle and I was bored, there were some triggering moments that would lead me back to binge eating. But I had an awareness now that it's very specific to those moments because of the environment, because of the social life, because of the financial situation. And that gave me the confidence that if I fix those things, the symptoms will disappear. And slowly over the years that followed, I was able to observe when I have a social life, I don't have it as much. I went to live in a Buddhist center for 2 months after I quit the medication, and I didn't have any binge eating because I had a low stress, spiritual environment with like minded people, social life. And I was able to just connect the dots and yeah, since it's just helped guide me on ways to curate not only myself, my mind, and my habits, but also my environment, most importantly, in order to live a better life and have less negative symptoms. And it also led me to reintegrating psychedelics back into my life because although being bipolar and having psychosis are big risk factors for psychedelics, and those are the reasons that I quit them for years, I always knew inside of me that how can I have taken psychedelics 30 plus times before and not had an issue until it was specific to other triggers? And in that first trigger, psychedelics were not involved. That's what blew my mind the most. It was purely about this quitting the job and new encounter and no plan that's following next. My second episode, yes, there were psychedelics, but that was an unconscious use of it, and other factors as well were happening. But I knew inside of me that the risks were worth taking because I had always looked at the science, and the science to me was saying that there's relatively not much risk, and it's potential that psychedelics can be a medicine for mental health as much as they can be a caution, um, danger for mental health. But because I already had that much experience, I wanted to get to a deeper truth for my own situation.
So, what led you back to working with psychedelics again?
A gradual process, but I think it was learning about shamanic work. At the time in the UK where I was full time working on my business, I also landed in a part time volunteer experience living in a rural place where the the people from that land were hosting shamanic sweat lodges and burial rituals with people who had been trained by shamans in the Amazon, proper 20 years plus experience, authorized by the tribes to respect their traditions and bring it to Europe. Uh, and I was initiated into a shamanic sweat lodge experience or two. And in those experiences, I found the power of psychedelics and the power of flow states and the power of spirituality all combined without needing to ingest any substance. And because I knew that with psychedelics, the set and setting was such a big factor, this is actually the piece that shamanism was bringing in a lot of natural healing. It's the community, it's the music, it's the power of intention. And when you bring all of these factors together, you can have a deeply psychologically healing experience. You can even have a deeply spiritual, altered state of divine connection. And so it just kind of connected the dots between all of these things. And I was meeting some people who were into shamanism and psychedelics, and I found a safe person to have my first real mushroom trip in a ceremonial setting and together with somebody else, which adds a lot of the safety. And so I was using the binge eating disorder and the bipolar as my intention to learn about it in more deep and try to access what was that inner wisdom that I have that shows the links between all of these things. And my mushroom ceremony went well. It went really well. I didn't go a crazy dose either because I was still being very cautious. But the fact that it went well while I was still on antipsychotic medication, that for me showed that there was a possibility space that I could explore gradually to reintegrate psychedelics back into my life. And that led me to exploring DMT for the first time. Again, small dose, medium dose, never a breakthrough, huge thing. And then a year later, it led me to reintegrating LSD again into my life. And again, starting with a microdose, then a small dose, then a medium dose. And I found that there were no issues. And by that time, I had taken it 5 or 6 times while on meds, and there were no issues. So that for me was just confirmation of more and more scientific experiments that things are fine. And it's actually a lot to do with setting and trauma when things are not fine, or poor preparation. And so that's led me to where I am today. And it's also led me to the biggest psychedelic experience that I did in order to heal that trauma from when I was 5 years old.
What was that experience like for you?
I again went back to LSD because A, it was easy for me to get, and B, it was the one that I had the most familiarity with. And I had been thinking about this experience for a long time. It was planned for months before actually getting the logistics of having a trusted trip sitter coming and doing all this stuff. But I really felt that I needed a powerful tool in order to go so far back in time and heal something so deeply rooted. Because I had already tried things like hypnotherapy and classic somatic therapies, with the intention of processing that 5-year-old stuff. But they they were not leading to the result that I wanted. I really, when I went into that psychedelic experience, my intention was to show me the movie of what it is that I saw, that I felt, or that I experienced. I wanted to know, like, if I can transport myself back in time to my 5-year-old self and experience in today's body what I experienced then while holding my 5-year-old self and reparenting it with my adult nervous system. That was my intention with that psychedelic trip. And I took about 325 microgram dose, which I had already been in that dose level prior to my mental health issues. So I didn't want to go too crazy and go way beyond what I've ever been. But at the same time, I didn't want to go in the medium or medium high either, because I this was an important and very far back and deeply rooted trauma that I knew I needed a powerful tool. And so I did the whole very scientific approach with the blindfold and the music and trip sitter and everything catered, make a ceremony out of it, writing, journaling, preparing, breath work before all of this stuff. And one of the key things that happened during the ceremony itself, there were two major insights. One, I had a kind of multi-dimensional experience where the part of me that's not my mind or body, let's call it a soul or consciousness, intangible part of me, was able to look at a mental model that I had of my brain and the neural circuitry and the wiring of my brain. And I saw it almost as like a kaleidoscope that had a similar function as the Harry Potter library staircases that move, and they were in infinitely long tunnels. And so you could actually go into this brain structure and you could go down a tunnel, and that would represent the passage of time. And you could literally make a left, make a right, depending on the time that you wanted to go. And you could take a turn and go into that particular neural circuit. And then you can see the switches of whether you think a memory is good or bad, whether something should be feared, yes or no. And in that experience where I had that mental model and I lived it, I actually went through those hallways and I went through those circuits and I saw the circuits in my brain and I was like, that part of me that did the healing went into that memory and found the flip or found the circuit board and just flipped that memory into like no longer something to fear. Just like discard it. There's no, you don't, it was like that image was telling me, forget the movie. You don't need to learn about the movie. It's the past. Stop stressing about it. And the next experience that I had was that of ego death. There was no more images. There was no more mind. There was no more body. There was just pure awareness and stillness. And I have no idea how long it was. It could have been 5 seconds that felt like 5 minutes. It could have been 5 minutes that felt like 5 seconds. But when I was in there, I could sense, like, wow, this is what all of the great spiritual teachers are telling about when they talk about enlightenment and da 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 da. And I'm not saying that I'm enlightened, because this is not my permanent state, but it was a temporary snapshot of there is no ego in this space. There's no mind, there's no body, there's no thoughts. There is just pure awareness. And I had the feeling inside of me that everything is in me and I am everything at the same time. And from that point, I don't want to exaggerate too much, so disclaimer, it's not a forever thing, but I really felt like all my worries are gone. Like I have glimpsed at the experience of my infinite nature. And so, whatever happens to my mind and my body and whatever whatever experiences that I have compassion for because they're experiences that I'm meant to have and I'm here to learn from them and experience them and go on because there's no such thing as mistakes. There's just a path that we go on. And I couldn't tell you what is a scientific truth about the infinite nature of the universe, but I can tell you that in my experience, having had a glimpse of that state, it even detached me from psychedelics itself. Like I felt that I'd learned the lessons that I needed to, and now I was just here to do the work and help other people. And I think, in fact, this is what has led me to the psychedelic facilitator path post this. So, just to give an idea of timelines, my ego death psychedelic healing experience was in November 2024. And yeah, now we're beginning 2026. I've been off of psychiatric medication for 1 year and 3 months, and I'm more psychologically stable and grounded than I have ever been before. I don't drink alcohol, I don't smoke. I don't even take psychedelics on a regular basis anymore. It's a very rare and ceremonial thing that I try to do in legal contexts, and I'm legally training as a psychedelic facilitator, and we'll see where this path takes me.
So where's your life heading now?
Everything that comes up in a psychedelic experience, good or bad, and I would even extend that to shamanic experiences, hypnotherapy experiences, any even breathwork experiences. any modality, not just psychedelics, that help us access the subconscious mind, bring up altered states of consciousness, and lead us to mental, emotional, physiological changes. They are here to deliver us a message of self understanding. It's not predictable what those messages will be because the psyche is so complex as far as I understand it. But I'm quite confident that whatever experience does unfold and whatever visuals or sensory processing unfolds in that moment is exactly what your body needs for you on your journey of growth in that moment. I think the work is in learning to reconnect with those body signals and in learning how to better interpret those experiences and in learning how to integrate the lessons they bring into everyday life. And I think that's a good segue to answer your question because now I've gone back into the employment world because I could sense that my nervous system needed stability, geographical stability, social stability, financial stability. As an entrepreneur, I was trying to juggle too many hats. I wanted to have it all, and I couldn't put my energy in all unless it takes a long time at a very slow rate. So I've consciously decided as I train to become a psychedelic facilitator in this space to just take things a little slower and be more focused on the psychedelic path, really going deep into the science, really going deep into maybe helping fewer people, but in deeper ways, while at the same time giving more time, space, and energy for my own personal desires, like figuring out where do I want to settle down and having a social life and building a base and just building a life more slowly, planning to have kids, but currently single. So that's a journey as well. And these are the things that I'm prioritizing now because I feel that all of the journey that I've been on has led me to enough self awareness about me, about my brain, about mental health. It's led me to enough of healthy habits that I feel stable and confident that it would take a really extreme scenario to throw me off of my track again. And actually, now the path of growth for me is in doing the same daily boring stuff like going to the gym, eating healthy, getting a good night's sleep, and doing that consistently.
Is there anything that still feels important to say?
One of the big steps in the reintegration of psychedelics in my journey was actually reading the book DMT, The Spirit Molecule by Rick Strausman. And the reason that I was interested was not just because I was interested in experimenting with DMT. The main reason was because it actually ties together a lot of the deep questions that I had about what happens after death and what is spirituality about and what is the link between life, death, spirituality, and psychedelic states or altered states of consciousness. And so in that book, I was able to read a lot of very similar testimonials of people's stories having the DMT experience, talking about a universe or world that feels more real than the everyday waking consciousness that we call reality. And so, after all of my psychedelics experience up to that point, I was always doubting whether are we actually in a reality, or are we in a simulation? Or are we in a video game? Or are we in just the dream of God or something along those lines? And the fact that DMT is produced naturally, endogenously by the human brain, although only in very specific circumstances, like close to the time of death, this to me is a fascinating territory. And also darkness. There's something about darkness that also releases DMT. And yeah, it just helped build more mental models and more bridges that helped me gain confidence in reintegrating psychedelics in a conscious way.
To wrap things up, after you have an experience, how do you integrate that into your life?
So I cannot speak about integration process without actually speaking to part of my process of ceremony. When I am doing a ceremony, I actually have a note-taking process. I have a journal. If I'm going to be holding it myself, part of my consciousness is in the note-taking process when I can, when I have a breakthrough thought or important thing that I need to write or draw, I do that, and then I go back in. When I have a trip sitter, then the trip sitter is taking the notes and possibly videos, possibly photos, and those notes are time stamped. And so when I integrate, I'm reviewing those notes and I'm seeing how does it happen. And usually it's the combination of the insights that came with the I need to go back and read this again to really hammer those insights that leads me to the actions that I need to take in order to really integrate what I needed from it. But yeah, I think I only started doing this process after I already had a lot of experience with psychedelics. So I I actually in the time where I was using psychedelics very unconsciously, recreationally, my integration process was not explicit, not scientific, but it happened through community. And I think that's an important thing because the psychedelic experience is not one that everybody has, and it's not a common one, and it's not an easy one to describe. So when you find people who are having or have had psychedelic experiences and can relate, just having a long conversation about each one's experiences and what does it mean about the nature of the self, the nature of the universe, the nature of reality, the nature of God. These questions are important part of integration. And I think the reason that I wanted to share that as well post my official integration process is because I already had a lot of those mental models in place by the time that I started doing real scientific kind of integration. And I would say also that learning about Buddhism has helped me integrate both my psychedelic experiences and my mental health psychiatric experiences and really made sense of them. Yeah, in a way that I could digest them, wrap them up, archive them in my brain, and move forward without having them burden me. So a combination, I would say. I've probably said a few tools between the journaling, the note-taking, the spiritual study, and the community. I think that's a pretty good package for integration tools as a starting point.